Kingdom Business Summit 2023 is here, and this is our biggest and best lineup of speakers we've ever had. This event is 2.5 days of high-level, practical business training. The event is jam-packed with the tools you need to scale up your business and deepen your walk with the Lord. Over the 2.5 days, I will be bringing some business training as well as a hand-picked group of high-caliber speakers. There's a formal dinner where you can let your hair down and have fun with live entertainment. We will have a worship service where we get together, lift our arms, and praise Jesus. We will have a faith-filled prayer meeting, a networking space to meet like-minded entrepreneurs, an exhibitor showcase area, and we will finish with a time of prophetic ministry where you can get a word directly from the Lord. So if you're looking to scale up your business and at the same time learn how to deepen your walk with the Lord, then I invite you to join me for 2.5 days of practical business training at Kingdom Business Summit 2023. Well, guys, welcome back to the podcast. I have a guest with me today, Eric, who I will introduce in just a second. Now, Eric's got a very interesting story and a very interesting assignment that he does. And we're going to glean from him a little bit from his experience and how it plays out in the marketplace. Eric, I'm pumped that you're able to join us today. Why don't you lead off by telling us who is Eric?
Awesome. Thank you so much, Wes. First of all, thank you for having me on your podcast. I have been following this podcast for a while now, so it's really a privilege and an honor to be here. Well, Eric, that's my name. Born in Ghana, West Africa in the 80s. So any of you 80s babies out there, hello. Moved to New Zealand when I was 5 years of age, and my first day of school, couldn't speak a word of English. Then in 97 was when our family moved to Melbourne, Australia. So for about 3 years before I actually got sent back to Ghana. The reason being I had 4 suspensions in high school, joined a gang and just doing a whole bunch of really naughty, bad stuff. So my dad actually, very smart man, told me that it would be a 3-week holiday, with some spending money, just go chill out, have some fun, son. I'm like, yes, because I was disengaged at school. So I thought, wow, this is amazing. And then I got there and hey, 3 weeks became 7 years.
So your dad bought you a one-way ticket instead of a two-way ticket.
Yeah, and when you're 14 years of age and you were you hear the words holiday, you don't really check if it's a return ticket. You just take the money and the ticket and you go.
That's awesome. And how did that shape what you do today?
It shaped everything that I do today. So I remember, my parents, they were incredible in terms of every single Sunday, making sure that we went to church. However, I just really didn't connect in church. And so going to Ghana and I guess the church landscape, spiritual landscape over there was, every second TV channel is a preacher who's given a salvation call. And so it was actually, I hit rock bottom. I got to a point where I was quite suicidal twice in 2002. And it was an uncle of mine that actually took me to a church, and that would be where I would give my life to God. And from there, I would go to a prayer camp where we would pray 3-hour blocks. We would eat 1 meal a day, 5:30 p.m., probably why I'm still got a lean figure. And in between, all we would do is we would just memorize. We're taught to memorize scripture. And so the Bible that I was given upon entrance at that prayer camp was actually the King James version. And so even today, my 5-year-old son, his name is Kingston James, named after that Bible. And so a typical morning would look like, we get up and we pray, and then they tell us today we're going to memorize Psalm 91, verse 1 to 13. And so then off we go. He that dwells in the secret place of the Most High God shall abide under the wings of the Almighty. And because I was one of 2 people who were not pastors, you can just imagine that my growth trajectory just went through the roof because of the inspiration of those around me as well. And so throughout that whole journey, in terms of my Christian faith, my foundations, in terms of my resilience, overcoming suicide, all of that was really shaped and formed during those 7 years.
Your dad was a smart man then, really?
Whew. Man, I thank him every day.
Yeah, I bet you do. And I was just thinking when you said you read the King James, you'd probably be right at home with T.D. Jakes, man. That guy still preaches from the King James version.
Get ready.
Yeah, that's
So
awesome.
we had T.D. Jakes, a guy called Bishop Noel Jones, and then obviously Hillsong and Kirk Franklin. They were like the four preachers and singers that were on repeat at the prayer camp.
Love it.
Just on repeat.
Love it. Well, there's some good foundation there. Oh, hey, I hope you're enjoying this week's episode. Listen, I'm just here training a group here in this room, but I need you to subscribe to my channel. Guys, do you think they should subscribe to the channel? Yeah! Guys, please subscribe. All right, so today you run an organization called the Royal Hood. Tell us what that is and essentially, what you're out to achieve.
Yeah, so my 4 suspensions at Ringwood Secondary College in Melbourne came from a place of me having a lack of identity. So I was racially bullied on my first day at school in 1997 here in Melbourne. I was the only African, so I just looked different, and so the kids thought they could make fun of that without, I guess, even knowing the impact. And so right from that space, I had very low self-esteem. And so it would be at this prayer camp that I would actually come across 1 Peter 2, verse 9. You are a chosen generation, a royal priesthood, and a holy nation. Now, in Ghana, I was still dealing with the mental battle of who am I? Am I worthy? Because of the color of my skin, am I inferior, as I was told? And so that verse and that section, you are chosen, royal, I was like, oh, that's good. I literally, meditate upon that, and just it became my new starting point. It became my new chapter of discovering that in God we are royalty. So in every boy there is a king, in every girl there is a queen. And so that's where it began in 2004, I think it was. And then when I came back in 2007, I was asked to speak at a school, Lighthouse Christian College here in Melbourne. In 2010, did that, was awesome. And then a few years after, I was just telling my wife, I'm like, I really want to create something for teenage boys who are a little bit of a version of me when I was a teenager, who are lacking identity, don't believe in themselves, no confidence. And so I shared the scripture with her, and she's like, well, why don't you call it the Royal Hood? I was like, girl, I married a smart one. And so that was 4 or 5 years ago. And that was how the name the Royal Hood actually came to be. And that was the experience that it was birthed out of.
Yeah, cool. What age groups do you spend most of your time with then now?
So we work with preteens, so probably 10 to 13, but the actual Royal Hood program is for 14 right up until 18 years of age.
Love it. What are you trying to build into these young kids?
As those words, say, chosen, to remind and let every young person know that they are chosen by God, that there is a mark on their life. There is purpose over them. The royal priesthood is really reminding them of the authority that they have in God. And then the holy nation is the idea that, hey, because you're marked, because you have authority, this is the standard of living that you ought to rise up to, in terms of how the music that you listen to and the honor and respect that you give to your parents. This is how it ought to look like because you've been marked by God. And so, we've sort of seen that in this generation with social media influences and distractions, it can be really easy for our young people to I guess, without even realizing, be mentored by such people. And what we're trying to do is really bring them back to spiritual, biblical foundations that will set them up for their future.
So solid. And, as a dad of kids that are a bit younger than that, thank you for being a voice to that group, because they cop a lot of grief. And I want to get into the grief that this generation are copping in a minute. But, we've always said on here, you can't outperform your identity. You never will. Your identity is like a thermostat, right? It's designed to keep you at a certain point. And if you outperform it, then you'll sabotage you. If you underperform it, you'll lift your game. But your identity basically sets where you are for the rest of your life. And what you're doing is you're literally grabbing these kids and putting a godly identity inside of them at the right age. You know, because if you go back in your story, you were telling us when you went back to Ghana, you were not a minority back there, right?
No.
You're a minority in Australia, but you weren't a minority back home. But because such a good, strong foundation was put inside of you, when you came back here to be a minority, it didn't matter, right? And that's essentially what you're doing to these kids. You're getting them at an age where you can feed into that identity. Then when they go out into the big wide world, right, they've already got such a secure faith that the world doesn't, you know, take them off course. And it's phenomenal, actually. It's phenomenal what you're doing. You know, because, I mean, I guess we all have some exposure because our kids would go to Sunday school or some version of, you know, youth group. But it's really only 1 hour a week. Like, you know, whereas, I mean, not that that's bad, it's excellent. But on top of that, you know, there's an opportunity for people to get alongside and you get alongside them and your team and build in them over a journey, which I think is absolutely phenomenal. But that's not common. Like most people that I talk to say some pretty negative things about obviously millennials. Remember Gen Y? I remember when Gen Y came along and everyone was like losers, right? And then millennial came on and they went super losers, right? And then it was Gen Z and it's like super loser. And then there's Alpha. I don't know what name. Like, and it's like, well, they're actually like the story is no different. Like I still remember, I'm a little bit older than you, but my parents would talk about their parents. So go a few generations away. They would say, my parents would say that their parents hated the Beatles. Well, why would you hate the Beatles? Like now it's pretty cool music. It's like, because they shook their hair and their hair was unkept. That was the reason. It's like, and so they, you know, the youth of today, right? They couldn't get their head around the youth of today because they would like the Beatles. It's like, it's no different today, right? Yeah. So you've got this generation who are just like writing off the next generation, which I find weird because they're the parents of that generation they're writing off, right? So question mark, how's your parenting if you don't like the generation that's coming after you? And then the kids, like there was a band called Michael and the Mechanics, and they sang a song, "Every Generation Blames the One Before." So you've got the generation above writing off the younger generation. You've got the younger generation blaming, like, and it's a bit of a mess. And what it takes is somebody like you to speak life into that. So I guess, you know, millennials, Gen Z, Alpha coming, they get a lot of grief. But what would you say about them as a generation, as a people group?
As a people group and a generation, I think that obviously that they are the leaders, you know, they are the tomorrow's leaders. Obviously their perspective and worldview is quite different. But I really think that what I'm seeing is there's a lot of potential. There's a lot of creativity within these young people. And to be honest, you know, all they need is a Barnabas from the Bible, a biblical Barnabas who will come along to encourage and help, you know, tap that destiny that's within them and how to channel that. You know, I remember last year we held a leadership, youth leadership conference that my wife and I ran. And, you know, I was sharing a story about, there's a kid called Ryan's World. My kids love Ryan's World. In 2019, according to Google, Ryan's World, he's only like, it was like 8 years old at that stage. He made $20 million in a financial year, all from just unwrapping toys. And so the whole idea, the whole reason of the story was to share with them that, hey, don't just be consumers, but actually produce content yourselves, you know what I mean? Because we see them a lot of times on social media, but an encouragement to come alongside them to say, hey, you can also create stuff. Did you know that? You know, and then all of a sudden they're still on the device, but now they're not just consuming, but they're actually producing, allowing their creativity to come alive. And who knows what that could lead to, the outcomes, the impact, you know? And so that's what I see, is that they have a lot of potential greatness and, you know, creativity. They just need someone, Barnabas, to come alongside them and just champion them so they can actually bring that which is in them out.
Think they're lazy?
I wouldn't say lazy, I'd probably say comfortable. I'd probably say comforts. And I'll put my hand up as a 36-year-old. Sometimes I lean more towards comfort than I do towards. And one of my key words for this year, key phrases, is actually to do hard things. So whenever I'm presented with a situation that's easy or hard, I actually want to go for the hard because I understand that it's the hard things that bring out the maximum of things. So I wouldn't call them lazy. I'd probably say they're comfortable.
Because they get a lot of grief for being lazy, right? And one of the common phrases is they're lazy, and they won't clean their room, and those sort of things, and you can't get them to clean up. And I've heard tradies tell me, like they won't clean a storeroom, and they won't clean up after themselves and things like that. And there's an element of truth to that, right? And I mean, we've kind of created a rod for our own back in some ways, because we're starting to see the evidence of what happens when you give somebody a trophy for coming sixth, right? So that's a real problem. But every generation had a mistake that was fed into them. So that doesn't make these generations any different. We're just starting to see that did not work, right? But I'm also seeing that they have some phenomenal skills that no generation before them have ever had, right? My 14-year-old at the age of 2 would open an iPhone and start, like playing around and playing games. It's like, I was still struggling with an iPhone in 2007 when it came out. Like, so I think all of that just feeds into, here's my thesis. They're not lazy. They're uninspired by boring things of a yesteryear, uninspired by them, right? So you say to them, put data entry into this spreadsheet, and they'll fall asleep and quit, and they'll need 3 weeks off for mental health after an hour's worth of work, right? But you say to them, hey, can you learn Chat GPT and start producing blogs for my website and get my Google ads running? And they've done it by morning tea, right? So they're not lazy. We're just channeling them towards stuff that doesn't work. So, and that doesn't always work. If you take an apprentice in a trades-based business, you need them to be able to clean up. So they can't just say, well, go and build my ads, because somebody's got to do the actual work. So I understand the dynamic. But I just think in many cases, we're trying to plug a square peg in a round hole. And because we're on the shoulder of such interesting change, I think the smartest thing we can do is take this younger generation and start to get them on forward-focused, future-focused elements of our business, and not trying to get them to sit in a back corner and, do something rudimentary. Okay, they've got. I find they've got so much vision, and like you said, so much creativity. They've got a natural propensity to look after the world, and they've got a natural propensity of love for their fellow man. Very good traits to have, So, but one of my questions for you is, this is a business audience that would be watching the show. With your experience, what can we do over the next 2, 5, 7 years to start to prepare ourselves and our businesses for the influx of Gen Z and Generation Alpha coming behind them, so that we can capitalize on this generation and the skill sets that they do have, rather than be frustrated about the skill sets they don't have? What can we start to do to prepare our businesses?
Well, I think it has to involve collaboration with that segment, with that group, with that generation. It has to involve collaboration where, they're also at the table, sharing their ideas, presenting their ideas, because then they can really take ownership. And when anyone has ownership, they'll do something a lot better than when they're just told, hey, do this. That's number one. Number two, I think also, on that table of collaboration is what are some of the interests of these millennials and this younger generation? And you mentioned it yourself, that they want to care about the planet, the environment. I remember when I was in corporate, we used to do some charity stuff, and looking at some stats around that, it just shows that employees, normally there's higher morale when they feel like they're giving back to community, so having an element of impact or giving back to the community, and tying that to something that that they love, and the environment, that sort of stuff as well. I think that really has great buy-in for them.
Yeah, what about mindset? They get written off as entitled generation. And I think there's an element of that that's true, but most of it created by us and the generations before, right? So, a lot of these younger kids were parented with an iPad, and not all, but some were, and when they played up, we bought them what they wanted to a large degree, and so that's kind of like the way they've grown. But I think from a mindset perspective, a lot of business owners struggle with the entitlement, because here again, we're in a shoulder of such radical change, right? There might be a business owner today who's like 50 to 60. And they're thinking, well, hang on a minute. When I started in this industry, I earned a threepenny bit before pounds and pence or something, right? It's like, and a kid comes in today and they're like, well, I'm not turning up for any less than $35 an hour, right? And it's like, you're still out of school. And so now it's interesting for me because that's just the market we find ourselves in. You cannot pay those people and you just won't get them. Like, how do we view that investment in them? Because it's still a bit unproven about what they can bring to the table because it's early. What would you say about making that investment and changing our mindset to be able to, validate this generation and bring them on board and collaborate?
Yeah, I mean that's a really good question. I think for the work that we do, we actually help the young people with their mindset about this sort of stuff as well. So there's a great quote that we sort of hinge some of what we do around, and it's by a guy called Frederick Douglass, and it goes like this: "It's easier to build strong children than to repair broken men." And so the whole idea, if you were to turn it into biblical context, it would be Paul saying, when I was a child, I did things like a child, but when I became a man, I put away my childish ways. And so childish ways looks like entitlement, like you cry when you don't get what you want, but now that you're a young man, young woman, what does that look like when you don't get what you want? How do you persevere? How are you resilient? How do you resolve conflicts when you disagree with something? And so I think that's going to be a work that we really need to focus on with the young generation. And a big part of this also, the responsibility does fall on parents, mothers and fathers, and that means some business owners as well, their children, to really look into this, to be able to know that they're also raising young people for the workforce as well, for someone else's business. And so for us, it's really coming back to those earlier stages of their teenage years, preparing their mind mentally for what it looks like to actually be a man or a woman responsible in a workplace. One of the things that we really value is just common things like respect and honor. In our program, we actually have a whole week dedicated to mum and dad and siblings, because we believe, as it said, charity begins at home. So if the kids can get these attributes and characteristics formed in the home, then when they go out to the workplaces, then they can also deliver those same attributes and characteristics as well to help improve the business owner's business. And hopefully at that time when there's improvement, business will be like, okay, well, we can negotiate.
Yeah. I love it. And so basically what we're saying is we need to employ the people that have been through your program, because they're going to be the most mature and the most honoring and the most well-rounded people. So that's good. You need to grow your organization a lot bigger so that you can just start feeding people into these companies, and so forth. Though these kids you're talking to, I find that a lot of them have a propensity for business. Probably more than possibly my generation, and definitely more than generation before me, right? Like if I think about my parents, the thought of starting a business was the riskiest thing you could possibly do, right? See, for me, I'm like, no. Like being an employee is the riskiest thing you can do because you've got one customer and it's your company you work for, right? Whereas I've got heaps, so I've deleveraged. But I find that, and you kind of alluded to it, right, with Ryan's Toys. But there are tens of thousands of people on YouTube, just as an example, who are making slime and making 50 to 100 grand a year, right? And actually, I still remember, I don't know whether you ever came across this girl, but her name was Jojo Siwa. And she basically started a YouTube channel where she would throw stuff on herself in the shower, fully clothed, so like goo and gunk and stuff like that. And she turned that attention into full-on songs, videos, and then actually she had bows in her hair in everything. So she actually made physical bows. They were sold all over the world in department stores, big brand, all from a YouTube channel, right? And I still remember, this is many years ago when my daughter was young enough to be interested in this. So she would put on a song. I still remember the song. It's like something about a boomerang or something. It's terrible. Can't stand it, right? And it would be on the house like 50 times a day. But I looked at how many views, and this thing is like, it had been out like 24 hours and it has 14 million views, right? I've been spending good money on my podcast, right? And I can't even get like 1 minute's worth of her views so far, like, and so, and then other people, like, you'll watch a thing on, there's one where they get things and drive over them and film the sound, right? And it have like 30 million views on an episode and stuff. So, yeah, so I guess, like, what are they saying to you? They want to be in their own business, like strong content creators. Like, what are you hearing in terms of their aspirations? Because we can marry those up. Like, if we can hear from you what some of those aspirations are, we can position our business to be able to, take those kind of aspirations on board. But what are you hearing?
Yeah, I mean, there's definitely a lot of social media, the content creation stuff, because they're doing it anyway. They're doing it anyway. And so a lot of them are talking about that. We just even recently put out a call for graphic designers in our alumni community. We have about 4 boys that reached out, want to do it. My wife ran a teenage girls camp, and we've got some of those girls wanting to volunteer for our preteen program. So, they, in terms of social media, graphic design, something that I've come across, but also just really wanting to do things to do with the younger generation, that like they're the next generation. That there's a massive thing for that as well, massive desire, almost to give back. We just had a kid who finished high school and right now is studying to do youth work as well, to be able to help their teenage version that really struggled mentally as well. So, I mean, in sort of our circle, that's what we're definitely seeing. And then, you've got some of those kids that are also wanting to do a lot of computer science and IT and building, what's the phrase? Because I'm in that industry. What's the whole coding system and all of that. There's also been chats about obviously Jasper and all those AI technology that a lot of them are really interested in. And a lot of them can build their own computers as well. Whereas we've got a kid called Benji who just always buys parts for anything and everything. He's got like parts for a guitar that he built from scratch and computer that he built from scratch. And so they're quite creative in terms of learning to build and put this together as well.
Yeah. Yeah, that's awesome. Let me wrap up the kind of things that you've said that we need to take part of, right? So this generation are driven by vision and impact. I would totally agree. If your business doesn't have a big focus of how you're going to improve people's lives or impact the world, then you're going to find it very difficult to employ Gen Z and Gen Alpha, right? Because they're so driven by impact and things like that. So we all need to have a vision that's big enough that they can get behind it, okay? And my experience, when they do, they'll work really hard and discretionary effort goes through the roof. Second thing is being flexi work arrangements. So this is hard to do in some industries, but it may mean that you have to get 30% more people than you need because at any given time, 30% of them are traveling around the world and you need to be able to plug those gaps. If you say, no, they need to be with me 52 weeks a year and 45 hours a week, you just won't get any people, right? That's kind of what you're hearing on the ground. The third thing is mentorship or Barnabas. Like you've got to be able to invest in these. You can't just employ them and let them sit because they'll go somewhere else where somebody invests in them, right? So we've got to be able to have some sort of internal mentoring program where we can keep feeding into this younger generation. And you're going to want to anyway, because we need to fix some of the junk that was, put in them, right? And then fourthly, if many of these guys are going to, like what we've spoken about, is they're going to pop up in business, then we need to find a business model that somehow allows them to kind of run their own business in your business, because they're going to want to be that entrepreneurial, nature into what they do. So not all of them. Some of them are going to be happy to be employees, but there's a propensity to want to run their own thing and do their own thing and be quite self-sufficient. So in our business model over the next 10 to 20 years, we need to be considering how do we foster an environment where they can start their own business inside one, which I think they would quite enjoy from my time with them. But it would help us actually build a business, I mean, we run a media agency. I have a bunch of millennial and Gen Z people. I absolutely love them. I want more millennial and Gen Z people working for me because I just reckon they're the greatest group of people that I've ever met. Fired up, discretionary effort, hardworking, fun to be around. Sure, they can be a bit fragile and things like that, but we all can in certain environments. So like for me, I'm like, well, if I'm like, no, you've got to die to your own vision and help mine, that's not going to work. But I could create an environment where people can run their own agency inside my umbrella agency and let them feel it, right? So I've got to start thinking about what that looks like in a 20-year window if I'm going to be sustainable. So that's the things that you've listed off that I noted that as business people, we need to start thinking about and putting inside of our business so that we can attract, retain, and get the best out of those generations that are coming. What would you say though to the parents, right? So people that are listening to my show would skew more towards parents' age. So you spend your time with these kids, right? But I'm sure you'd have a message for the parents, and that might come out of the frustrations that you hear from the kids or whatever. But I just want to give you free rein just to talk to the audience right now, right? What would you say to the parents of these kids?
Yeah, well, as part of our program, we actually have parent and teen mentoring sessions as well, because we really want them to be on the same page. So this is where a parent may bring up something that their kid's doing that, that they want to see a change in. I then, take over and sort of keep the kid accountable. So little things like a kid who his dad would want him to bring the phone in the living room by 9:30. The kid would always do it, bring it at 9:45. Dad comes in the room screaming. Kid tells me, "Oh, Dad's always yelling. I don't know why he's always yelling at me." So I sort of come like, "Well, we need to really work to that 9:30 timeframe, don't we?" But what I would say to parents is this, and I'm actually partnered with Focus on the Family Australia as well, with Brett Ryan, and we do a lot of parent workshops and things like that. And one thing that I found, the story of the parable of the talents. We read, and I've heard it so many times. I've preached it myself in churches so many times, and we often talk about it in terms of talents and giftings. What if there is another layer to another dimension to that story? Because it says, right, 1 to 1, he gave 5, he gave 2, he gave 1, and then he went away. In Psalms, the Bible says that children are a gift from above. And when the master comes back and he, accounts for what everyone has done, what if that those servants represent parents? And what if the gifts that they were given represent our children? As parents, we are stewards. We've been entrusted with these gifts and talents that are young people, that are our children. And I believe that one day, on that day, one of the questions will be, what did you do with the gifted children that I gave you? And so that is something that is my heart's desire, to really help parents have that focus, have that legacy. The other thing as well, legacy, while we're at it, I look at my 2 boys growing up, and knowing the challenges that I went through, I just want to help them as best as I can. But also, I think one of my greatest legacies will be to impart kingdom into them. The Bible says a good man leaves an inheritance for his children. For me, I'm looking at the spiritual values, like prayer and those things that I can impart. So another question for parents that I challenge questions with is, what kind of spiritual legacy will you believe in? Will they be kids that rise up and just know how to pray because they saw mum and dad do it, Or perhaps will they be kids that just want to get into the word? What kind of legacy spiritually that are we leaving for them? And I think the third, maybe and last one is that, the most important work that we will ever do, I believe, is within the 4 walls of our home. And I say that because in 2019, I went back to Ghana. And the same uncle who took me to church where I gave my life to Christ, he had just passed away. So I went to, pay my respects and say goodbye. And I'll never forget sitting there. This was my first funeral at like age 33, my first ever funeral. His wife got up and then his son got up and just speaking all these words. And I lived with him as well. So I knew him, incredible, incredible man. And so here I'm just hearing all these words about him and all this stuff that he did. And man, I just thought to myself, like, what will be said of me one day by my children and my wife? Like, as much as I'm out in the world doing things and I'm here in this school speaking and doing all of this, when it all comes down on that day, when our God calls us and our time is up, at our funeral, it'll be our spouse and our kids that will mount up on that podium with a microphone to speak words. Not our boss or whoever it was, but it will be those people. And so for me and the work that we do, especially with parents, we just really want to help, reframe and reshape some of those thoughts and so they can focus and hone their energy in those areas and leave a lasting impact. And in the process, have a whole lot of fun with their families, hey, and make a difference and influence them. So, yeah.
That just got really real and heavy. I mean, even for me, three beautiful daughters. I've got an obligation to, help them become, great ladies that contribute to society and things like that. And yeah, it's so beautifully put because, the 10,000 people I've coached in my life, the day I die, will be like, oh, that's a shame. Wes was a good guy, hopefully. But the legacy of the kingdom of the culture in the business world, that's going to live on through my family, yeah, and it really matters what they think, and it doesn't really matter what some client 23 years earlier did or didn't say. It really won't matter, and so like when I don't know whether you felt it, but when you said that the kids are one of those treasures and that you're going to give an account for them, I think it became really real. So I guess thank you for helping us catch the revelation that we've got to fight for the family, and that that's one of our massive priorities. And thanks for reminding us, even though you didn't use the words, that that love God and love your family would be more important than build a business. And if you've got $1 billion assets, but you've got kids that don't want to know you because you're a mongrel, then that's not success in the kingdom of God. And so you didn't use those words, but you alluded to that. And so I really appreciate that about you, that you're bringing us back to what matters. Because it's so busy and crazy out there. And we've got to, with those people that are close to us, we've got to hold them in close, and we've got to do life together, because that's just ultimately more important. That's awesome, mate. How can people find out more about you, Royal Hood? Like, where can people go? What are some handles people can check out?
Yeah, so theroyalhood.com, that's the website. The Royal Hood on Instagram as well, and Facebook. Yeah, those are the places. And then ericagyeman.com as well as my school sort of workshop site. And then I'm looking forward to being in Brisbane for the conference as well. My wife and I and one of our team members will be there as well. So if anyone is going to be there, it'd be good to say hi.
Yeah, Eric's talking about the Kingdom Business Summit, which we've obviously got on in March. To find out about that, go to kingdombusiness.com.au. But ultimately, it's our big annual conference. It'd be so good to have you there. You'll be engaging really heavily with our delegates, which will be awesome. One final thing that we let everybody do on the show is, I'll paint a picture. There are people that are listening to this right now. They're running on a treadmill. They're mowing the lawn. They're walking out, the dog, or driving, listening to the podcast. I just want you to take 30 seconds, 1 minute, and give them some inspiration to keep going. What would you say to those people that might just need a little shot in the arm?
What I would say to those people is, yeah, as you said, keep going. That our best days are always ahead of us, not behind us. When God says, I know the plans I have for you, plans of good and not of evil, to give you a future and a hope, he means those words. And so in every area of our lives, whether it's the finance, whether it's the business, whether it's the family, have the faith in your heart that all things work together for good to them that love him and are called according to his purpose. And so if you do that, have that faith, all things I believe will work together for your good.
Love it, man. Thank you. And you're such a gifted communicator. I hope that if you haven't already, that you write a book for us to be able to, pass on to kids and learn from your wisdom. You're a blessing to the kids that you help. You're a blessing to the parents of the kids that you help, and you've been a blessing to us on this webinar. So, mate, thank you so much for helping us with the podcast. You've been a real blessing. For those of you who are watching, you don't get away with just listening. We want a bit of homework from you too. So here's my question for those of you who are listening. What's the one thing that Eric said that really popped out to you? I want you to put it in the comments section here for me because I want to see it and I want to engage with you there. So do that now. Eric, you're a blessing, mate. I look forward to seeing you in a couple of months in Brisbane. Look after yourself. Be blessed, mate.
Awesome. Thanks, Wes.